Hi, my name is Sage Foley, and I'm a seamstress and designer that works in film, fashion, and theater. When I sew my own passion projects at home, I generally draft my own garment patterns. Drafting your own patterns consists of taking your measurements or the measurements of somebody else and using a drafting system to create a flat pattern. A flat pattern is a two-dimensional paper pattern, just like the ones you can buy in a craft store. But generally, because it is adjusted to your measurements, it gets a much better result and fit than a store-bought pattern would. What some people don't know is there are actually a ton of different systems that you can use to draft a flat pattern at home. In a professional studio, the people who create the patterns, drapers, cutters, pattern makers, pattern cutters, the terminology differs depending on what part of the world you're in, they take the systems that they like the best and they use those and the measurements of the actor or whomever to create the flat patterns. I recently decided that I wanted to branch out and try some different drafting systems. I thought it would be fun to document my process of experimenting with these different systems and make it into a series on this channel. Kind of like a round robin style tournament where I compare the different systems of drafting to one another to see which system creates which garments the best. And truly, I just want to find one I prefer, because right now, I kind of just switch depending on whatever mood I'm in. So, for the first video in this series, I bought two new books. Patternmaking for Fashion Design by Helen Armstrong and Patternmaking by Dennic Chunman Lo. Dennic Chunman Lo is the head of creative pattern making at the London College of Fashion, and Helen Armstrong's book is frequently used as the textbook for pattern drafting courses in US fashion schools. I thought that these two systems would be good to compare because they're both used as academic resources and they're both very easy to get your hands on. I bought them both off of Amazon for around $20 to $30. When starting out drafting, usually the first thing a teacher will have you make is a bodice sloper. You can adjust a bodice sloper into any style of top or any style of jacket. Really, the only limitation is your imagination. We're going to use both of these systems to draft a bodice sloper using the same set of measurements, my measurements. From here on out for ease, I'm going to be referring to these systems by the names of the people who wrote them. So this system I will be calling Helen, and this system I will be calling Dennic. The first thing you want to do is look at the necessary measurement charts that you will need to draft a bodice sloper. On first glance, the Dennic system requires fewer measurements than the Helen system. I did think that the measurements needed for the Helen chart were more complicated and aren't necessarily things you always see on a standard measurement chart. However, the nice thing is that the Helen system does have instructional pages on how to get all of the measurements that it requires. So even if you don't have them, you'll be able to easily get them. On the other side, the Dennic system doesn't actually include any instructions on measuring. Now, this isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but for a book on pattern drafting, I think it's important that whoever is reading it knows how to properly take measurements. And if it is a beginner, it might be good to have that resource in there. One thing that I thought was kind of nice about the Dennic system measurement chart is it actually had you add on the ease to your measurements before you even started the drafting process. And this is nice because it just kind of minimizes the amount of math you have to do later on. I also enjoyed the section below the measurement chart, which discusses why a certain amount of ease is added to each of the measurements and what it accomplishes for each part of the garment. I thought this was a nice touch, especially for a new drafter. I took the time to double check that I had the exact same measurements used on both charts and that there weren't any discrepancies. Of course, I needed more measurements for the Helen chart. However, I wanted to make sure that the measurements that were used on both charts were the same. Once my measurement charts were ready, I started the drafting process. Both of these books will give you step-by-step instructions on how to draft the flat pattern. However, I thought the Helen system was much easier to follow along with. It used a point A to B method that was simple to understand. For example, it would say something like, use your back total length measurement to draw a line from point A to point B, and so on until you had a completed sloper. Dennic, on the other hand, used a set of measurements for a UK size 12 to illustrate the steps of the process. For example, its instructions sounded more like this. The depth of the armhole is usually half of the width of the front or back bodice block, plus an optional 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 an inch. In this case, the measurement would be 9 3/8 of an inch plus 3/8 of an inch. Now, Not only is that just more complicated to figure out, but in pattern drafting, there are certain measurements that are universal. For example, the depth of the back neck hole is usually an inch. However, in the Dennic system, these universal measurements were sometimes mixed in with the example measurements for the UK size 12, and they were not distinguished from one another. So sometimes I had a hard time telling if the book was telling me to use a number because it was a universal number or because it was pulling from its example measurement chart. I don't think the physical process of drafting the Dennic pattern is harder than drafting the Helen pattern, but I just think that the way the instructions were written turned what should be a pretty simple process into unnecessarily complicated one. Now you can see I have the pattern pieces done for both bodice slopers. On first glance, the main difference is that the Helen pattern only has one dart on the front pattern piece, while the Dennic pattern has two. The Helen front pattern piece is also much wider, which makes me a little worried that it's going to be a little bit too big for me, especially in the bust area. Now I'm cutting the pieces out of muslin. I always have muslin available in my studio for mock-ups. First, I sew the darts and press those out, and then I insert a separating zipper at center back. And then with right sides together, I sew my side and shoulder seams. Now it's time for the moment of truth, the fit test. Let's start with the Helen mock-up. This was obviously too big for me, especially bust up. I don't know if the problem was just that they had me add too much ease or what, but it just didn't fit. It was simply too big. This might be due to the lack of shaping in the form of a dart above the bust. As you can see, I don't just look at the fit when it's on me. I also put it on my dress form. I feel like it's helpful sometimes to take a step away because it can be hard to work out fit issues when you're wearing the garment yourself. This dress form is actually very close to my measurements, but if you can't find a dress form that is close to your measurements, I recommend looking up how to pad out a dress form so it is as close to your measurements as possible. Now the Dennic mock-up. This one is much closer to how I think a sloper should fit somebody. A sloper should be comfortable to wear. It shouldn't be overly tight. There should be enough ease, but it should be like a pretty form-fitting shirt. It was made to your measurements. It should follow the natural contours of your body. You can see slight gaping at the arm side. This is generally from an unbalanced side seam, and that's how I would fix this problem. An important thing to keep in mind is that these are just first drafts of these patterns. The whole point of a mock-up is so you can see what fit issues your flat pattern has, you can make those adjustments to your flat pattern, and then you have a really good base that when you want to make a stylized garment, you know it fits you and you don't have to work out these fit issues every time you want to make a pattern. I'm not going to go into detail about addressing fit issues in this video. I might make a video on that in the future, but I do think it is important to see whether a book on pattern drafting has a section about addressing fit issues, because that's a part of the pattern drafting process. Your patterns are not going to always come out perfect every single time. Helen does have a few pages after the drafting instructions telling you how to resolve common fit issues. Dennic, on the other hand, doesn't go into this at all, which I do actually think is a shame because I think it's a very important feature of a pattern drafting book. All right, final thoughts. The very first thing I want to get out of the way is I have actually drafted better fitting slopers than these two from different systems in the past. These aren't the two best systems I've used for this particular type of pattern before. The Dennic system created a better fitting piece, but I found the instructions to be unnecessarily complicated. And of course, I do think it is a downside that it doesn't tell you how to address fit issues, especially for beginner readers. On the other hand, while the Helen mock-up didn't fit as well, the instructions were much easier to understand, and I drafted the entire thing a lot faster than I drafted the Dennic pattern. Also, of course, I think the troubleshooting section is a huge bonus. So while this is kind of an unsatisfying conclusion, which I apologize for, I liked certain aspects and disliked certain aspects of both of these systems. If I was moving forward with a project using these resources and patterns, I would probably use the Dennic pattern as my sloper, and then I would use the book by Helen to make any adjustments I might need later on in the road. All being said and done, I still actually see these books as being pretty evenly matched, and I think that they're both pretty valuable resources to have in your collection. But whether you are actively drafting something, needed a recommendation, or just wanted to watch this video, I really hope you enjoyed it. I have lots of exciting things planned for this channel, and I can't wait to get started. But until then, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Fully Dressed, and I'll see you guys soon.